Good morning. I call to order the Town of Hilton Head Island Finance and Administrative Committee of Tuesday, October 6, 2020. Zendaya, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Committee members, please reply with present or here when called upon. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins,
Present.
Ms. Becker,
Here.
Mr. Lennox.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Zendaya, does staff have any changes to the agenda?
No, sir, we do not.
Therefore, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Committee members, if you have any changes to the agenda, please state them when called upon by Zendaya. Otherwise, please reply with yes or no to approve the agenda as presented. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Ms. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Lennox.
Yes. Committee members, are there any changes, additions, or deletions to the presented minutes?
No.
If
Move for their
none, may
approval.
I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 15, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Please reply with yes or no to approve the presented meeting minutes. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Ms. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Lennox.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, public comments concerning today's agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment closed yesterday at 4:30. At the conclusion of the open town hall, there was no public comment to be distributed. Mr. Chairman, at this time, we have one caller holding for public comment.
We have one caller for public comment. Mr. Hoagland.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I have three questions for retired banker Lennox, who lied and committed fraud along with fellow shysters McCann and Harkins, who claim they saw chamber accounting in a 1-hour inspection at the chamber office. Overseeing this malarkey were chamber swindlers Bill Miles and CPA Ray Deal, who assured these council persons all was okay and honest, while in the background pulling strings were the foxes in the hen house, the real chamber owners, Paula Bethea and Burr lawyer David Tiggis. And they all are ably assisted by puppet chamber lawyer board member Walter Nestor, with chamber accountants Ray Warco and Bobby Creech with Webster Rogers, past J.W. Hunt audit firm, who oversaw all the money laundering and embezzlement of millions of chamber funds, tax funds for all these crooks. Banker Lennox, where is the new non-corrupt and properly drafted DMO ATAX contract that chamber or new hired DMO must sign? Will Crooks lawyer Tiggis and Nestor draft this also? Banker Lennox, where is my ATAX for you on where and how Bill Miles and the other cronies, swindlers, and shysters spent tens of millions of tax funds? Banker Lennox, who hired and paid lion lawyer Danny Crow, the Municipal Association of South Carolina lawyer, to lie and commit fraud by saying Banker Lennox, Steve Riley, and Josh Gruber, counsel, don't have to comply to my ATAX FOIA on behalf of all Beaufort County taxpayers? Banker Lennox, why is Bill Miles allowed to illegally use tax money to pay his $400,000 salary, what we don't know he is stealing, and take over $1 million of tax funds to Canada to be used to violate 501c6 nonprofit tax codes and commit tax evasion? Also, Banker Lennox, why did you commit an illegal criminal act, also approving $200,000 in tax funds to be used by Crook Steve Riley, to be issued by Steve Riley to Crook's lawyer Greg Alford and Kim Likens for private use? Why are Lennox, Riley, Harkins, and Stanford all members of the secret Greater Island Council and Stanford Worst, the past president? Who hired and paid the new head of the secret Greater Island Council, Brooke Carlton Dallas, to attend a finance meeting to discuss the chamber? Who hired and asked all of you to be part of this clandestine underground council? Banker Lennox, have you got any questions this morning or any comments? Does anybody have any comments? Can anybody prove me wrong and collect $1 million this morning? Does anybody have any comments based on facts? I don't care about your opinions. I want to know about your facts. That's what I figured. You're all sitting there like a deer in the headlights, and you don't have any answers, and you're all corrupt, and you're all crooked because you're allowing this to continue. I feel sorry for all of you and your families, quite frankly. I pity all of you. Does anybody have any comment? Banker Lennox, any comment?
Your time is up, Mr. Hoagland. To again quote Socrates, who said, when the debate is done, slander becomes the tool of the loser. Today we have no unfinished business. Under new business, agenda item 8A, John Troyer, Director of Finance, will make a presentation on current to date town finances.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this month's financial update, I'd like to share my screen. I have a format similar to last month. Hopefully that continuity will help the message. So here's our, for the 3 months ending, and just an FYI, we're on the 6th day and into October, and so there's a few things that have not been posted yet. We're still in the closing process, but we are most of the way there, and I will point out a few things that are with incomplete information. Year-to-date collections, we have a good story. Right off the bat, if you look at the totals from this, I think it's very representative collection of revenues at $7 million compared to $4 million last year, a 70% increase. We don't expect that to continue, that rate of increase to continue for the year, but it's a really good start. Local A tax, you can see at 146% tax increment financing. There's only 2 months in the current year and 3 months in the prior year, and so we expect that to be above last year when that gets posted. One item of note, the real estate transfer fee. This is apples to apples comparison, and this is 3 months this year, 3 months last year, 82% up, and it's just indicative of real estate. A lot of transactions going on, and we're seeing it in our collections. H tax, we've got. We see some information, and it looks like occupancy is slightly less than last year, but then it looks like prices are above last year, and I think there's a little bit of a shift. Some of the collections from last year into this year. H tax was our worst hit for the year ending June 30th, and yet for the new year we're 2.6% above last year. Beach, well up. I think we're also the beneficiary here of some of last year's, some of the taxpayers or tax collectors paid into the new year after the due date, and so they just made that payment choice, and so we're the beneficiaries. The new year is the beneficiary, and you can see 146% up. Still early in the year. Electric franchise fee, half a point less, and so that's tracking. That's 3 months to 3 months. Road usage fee, that's the $25 per vehicle, and that's 2 months to 2 months, and so that's the information that we have. Stormwater, we're up, and this is only 2 months worth of stormwater, and I think a piece of this puzzle is that as the real estate transactions are happening, it gives an opportunity for the property to catch up on the stormwater, and our stormwater fund is going to be the beneficiary. And this year-to-date number at 95,000 is only 2 months, and so there's going to be more, and it will be larger. Property taxes. Here's our numbers from county, and it shows a nice strong start to the numbers. Business licenses. I'd like to talk about this just a little bit. We show $1,343,000 increase over last year. We know that there's $1,087,000 that was related to last year that the state paid after our window of availability, and so that pushed that state revenue from last year into this year. But even without that $1,087,000, that's a really strong start to the fiscal year for business licenses. So we're glad about that. EMS revenues, this is an item. What we're seeing is 2 months for the new year, 3 months for the old year. Each month, at the end of the month, we take our collection numbers from the EMS system and post it onto our financial system, and that transaction hasn't been posted yet. And so what you see are 2 months in the new, 3 months in the old, and that will be reflected once you get the financial statements and finish our numbers to close for September. Permits is the same way. Permits has a separate system that we have a permit system, the collections are there, and at the end of the month we take those numbers and post it into the financial system. That transaction hasn't happened yet, and so permits is 2 months in the new year, 3 months in the old, and so those numbers will improve as we finish the closing process. Again, our business license income just shows the seasonality, and it shows we're early in the year, but as we march forward, September, it's starting to get more and more substantial into the year. How do these collections compare to total? And this, I think, is a good representation of our all of our revenues and of the total. We're 11% in. If you compared this to last year, we were about 8%, and so I think that's a strong start, a really strong start to the new year. Expenses, they're more level than the revenues, and so here's just a picture of the 2019, but as you show, and I'll go back, our patterns generally follow, and so they look pretty close. And so we'll take a quick look at our spending. We'll start with the total general fund spending, about 7% less than last year, and so that's $8.7 million compared to the $9.4 million, $666,000, the last 7%. Lower spending, town council is less, and that's really just a matter of timing. Of the significant ones, public projects and facilities has some work that they're going to do a little bit later in the year, as long as revenues continue to hold, but it does show they're able to defer some of the spending. Sheriff and beach services, we've had discussions about that, and so our expectation is that the savings from the sheriff is going to be offset with some additional spending in the parks, but right now what we're seeing is savings from the sheriff. And on townwide, we got a couple of different dynamics going, but you do see that there's savings. There were some vehicles in the townwide, and those are being postponed at least past the first of the year, and we may postpone those into next year. And so those savings are being realized and should continue. How do we do compared to spending? At the end of September, we're 25% through for the year. Our spending rate is 20%, and so that's an indicator of the tracking below budget, and that's a good sign. Last year at this time, we were 22% through September 30th, and so you can kind of see that that trend of spending underneath the budget, underneath the available spending, is continuing. We're 3 months in, and so these savings and the spending rate are working. Last couple of years of general fund spending. And just again, reiterate that because the timing of our revenues and the timing of our expenditures are not together, we spend money early in the year before we start to collect the property taxes in December and January and February. And so it's traditional for the general fund to run a deficit for the first 7 months. And 2019 is a good example. 2020 looked very, very much like it. You run a deficit for the first 7 months, and at the end we have money to put back into the general fund. And there's the 2 years together. You can look and see that 2019 was more of a surplus than 2020, but 2020, even in a pandemic, did produce a small surplus. How are we doing compared to last year? And here's our net results. If you look at general fund, and that's our basic town operations, is in the general fund. Revenues of $4.9 million are ahead of last year's $3.3 million, 49% increase. And again, there's $1,087,000 in there that is related to state business licenses that related to really last year that got posted into this year just because of the change in schedule from the state. Even if you take that out, then we're showing a substantial increase over last year, and I think that's a really good start for the year. On the spending side, again, these are the same numbers. Year to date at $8.7 million spending compared to the $9.4 last year, and so we're $668,000 spending less. And so if you put these things together, last year, for the 2020, it's September 2019, but in the 2020 fiscal year, our year-to-date deficit was a $6 million deficit during the year. And again, at the end of the year, we came out with a small surplus. This year, we're 38% smaller, and so our temporary deficit is only $3.8 million compared to last year's $6 million. And so that's a really good start to this fiscal year. And again, even without that $1 million timing difference with the business licenses, we'd still be $1 million better than last year at this point in time. Key issues, these are the same issues as last year, continuing to keep control over expenditures. We continue to manage revenues. We will continue to report to this committee, and so you will know what we know, and so we'll be as transparent as we can, and so you'll see this as we see it. And so item number 3, so far so good, the measures are working. So item number 4, so far another month with positive trends, and so we're encouraged by the start of this fiscal year. Other issues, these are the same as last year. The revenues most at risk are tourist related. The one that had the hardest time last year was H-tax, and that's on prepared food and beverage. And primary thing that we're doing there is we're holding off on some capital purchases that are funded with H-tax, just to make sure that those collections are going to be enough to do that. And we'll make sure that the revenues are there when we can move forward with the planned spending of the capital. State aid tax, haven't seen any numbers, and so our collection for state aid tax is 0, and the same as last year, 0. And we expect the first payment, and it's quarterly payments here at the end of the month, and those are going to be used for our aid tax grants and of course the DMO in accordance with state law. And so that will those recommendations are going to come from the accommodations tax committee, and you'll be seeing those in December. So local aid tax, we're looking good. Beach, I think it's a beneficiary also of some late payments from last year, but it's got a good start for this year. More information. I'd like to stop here and just leave it for comments and questions.
Thank you, John. Committee, what are your comments and questions for John on the first quarter?
John, excuse me, could you expand on real estate transfer fee activity? And maybe you don't have the answers to this today, but I'd be very interested in the number of transactions that are involved to generate that amount of money. And I think even more important, is it possible to determine the state of origin for the people that are acquiring property here?
We can, and we'll dig into deeper as far as the number of transactions, and I think we can get into the average transaction size. I think those we'll be able to get to, and I don't think we'll be able to get to the origin of the transactions, but I think we're encouraged with, at least anecdotally, we're encouraged with the pricing, the home values or real estate values on the island, and we'll see if we can get some additional information for that. And we're also encouraged by the number of transactions, and so we have kind of a double dose of good news, is that there's a high number of transactions and the prices are strong.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, if you work backwards, take that $1.7 million first quarter transfer fees. If you work backwards, the value of those transactions are just over $680 million.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know the number of sales in there or what the average sales are, but I'm sure the local Hilton Head Realtors Association would be able to give that. And I think where you're going with that is the average transaction size increasing year over year?
Exactly. And I would also like to see where we're drawing from. Are most of these sales from people living here, or are they from out of state? And if out of state, where are we getting the big draws?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, John, as Tom was saying, I wouldn't waste your time doing that because it's probably readily available with our friends in real estate here on the island. The other question I have on EMS revenues, I didn't totally understand the big swing there. Is it anything related to indigent care and the COVID, and our EMS people making a lot of runs to people in need that can't pay?
No. I apologize for not being clear. The EMS revenue is one of the pieces that's incomplete with your September 30 numbers. And so we will post our collections from September into our financial system, and that transaction has not happened yet. And so what you're seeing is the 2020 number is only 2 months, and the 2019 number is 3 months. And so our expectation is once we post that transaction, that our EMS revenues are going to be similar, right with last year's numbers.
Right. I'm sure you were clear. I don't think I was paying enough attention, but thank you.
In our permits number, you can see our permits number is also, and the same dynamic is happening for the permits. That's only 2 months in the new year. There's 3 months in the old year. We're going to post that before we issue financial statements, but we just don't have those numbers in there yet.
Yeah, and if I may, any late information on the potential change in ATAX uses to continue to include what it does, but to also include infrastructure?
Yeah, we're encouraged by that, and we're appreciative of the state's action to allow for that. And that I don't think there'll be any immediate change, but that just gives us another tool in our toolbox.
Okay, yeah, it's a nice cushion to have.
Bill, I think it's important to note that, the amount of revenue from that revenue stream is not going to change because this is not a new tax. It just expanded the allowable uses for the expenditures. And so previously, the town has budgeted for those funds and budgeted for those funds in certain areas.
Right.
So those funds are kind of accounted for already, but it's good to know that if we have a situation arise in the future, we've got one more arrow in the quiver that we could use to address it.
Yeah, because the price would be paid by the not-for-profits if we redirected. So, okay, thank you.
Glenn or Tammy, any questions for John? John, I will say again that that statement of revenues you have on the screen right now does not look like we're in a pandemic. I'm so pleasantly surprised. I agree with you that some of those large favorable variances will amortize throughout the balance of the year, but right now through the first quarter, that looks very, very strong, and spending is under control as well. I'm encouraged.
Tom, I do have a question.
All right, Glenn?
Thank you. I'm unclear. Is this a property reassessment year?
It is not.
When is the next reassessment?
The last one was in 2018. It's every 5 years, so it would be 2023, but you would see the process start in 2022.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that given the increase in property values, we're probably going to see a further bump in property taxes when that comes along, unless property tax rates are altered. But that'll be another interesting phenomenon for us here. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And you make a good point that whenever a property transacts hands, even though the reassessment occurs every 5 years, anytime it changes ownership, there's what's called an assessable transfer of interest. And that means that whatever the capped value or appraised value was from the last reassessment actually gets caught up to whatever the current fair market value is determined to be. So every time that there's a property turning over, that value may be changing if it's been a while since it last sold.
That's very good news. So we'll see that increase sooner than 23. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're going to see it have a direct impact on our millage rate when we go to set the budget for next year.
Right, exactly. Tom, it's David Ames. I was finally able to join, so I'm with you now.
Welcome, David. Did you see the presentation?
Yes, I did, and I presume that the A-tax increase and beach preservation fee increase had something to do with timing. I wasn't involved in the conversation at that moment.
Yes, I think timing is an element of both of those revenue items, yes.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Okay,
And
John.
In addition to that, I think it's worth noting that at least for the last couple of months that we've seen, the numbers that we're seeing in terms of occupancy rates, average spend by individuals, things like that, those numbers are up year over year from last year's numbers. Now, it's not a substantial increase, but those numbers are up. So instead of 50%, we're looking at like 53%.
Josh, what really surprises me, however, is the hospitality tax number basically level with last year. Last year, restaurants and bars were 100% occupancy. This year they're half of that, and they're still generating a like amount of revenue this year as compared to last year.
Correct. And I think the way we're kind of reconciling that is we're seeing people here in slightly larger numbers than what we have the same time the year before, but you're seeing somewhat of a reluctance on some of those people to go out to eat in areas where there's large gatherings of people. So they're coming here, but they're buying groceries and cooking in their units or eating in rather than eating out. And so that's why, at least in my opinion, that's why there's a little bit of discrepancy between the A tax and the H tax.
All right. Okay. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you. We do have another memo for the next item on the agenda, and it's basically
Agenda item 8B. Josh, this is you. Or is it John?
Actually, we thought we'd have Angie take it up.
Excellent. Angie Stone.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you this morning. As you remember, probably back during the budget adoption process, Town Council asked us to hold off on delivery of merit increases for FY20 performance to be sure that we had a better understanding of our revenue stability. John has just given you an indication of our revenue and how we're holding up from a financial standpoint. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about our recommendation that once you have your October numbers, that we consider or that we move forward with implementation of our merit increases for FY20 performance. The money is in the budget, as the memo states. Usually we allocate merit increases for the prior fiscal year performance in August. We're now in October, and we would like to move forward with those as quickly as possible. Funding is there. We have completed the performance review cycle. We've got good numbers for all of our employees and their performance. We use merit increases to move employees through the salary structure. You may recall we recently implemented the results of, or the recommendations from our classification and compensation study. Those adjustments were to bring our salary structure into line with the market so that we could ensure that we can retain employees and attract new employees should we have vacancies. So those adjustments that were made for the classification and compensation study were not based on performance, were not merit related. What we'd like to move forward with now is those merit increases for FY20 performance. We have the vast majority of our employees falling into the meets expectations range, with a number of folks in exceeds and a few in the needs improvement area. Each year we provide to our management team guidelines on how to allocate their merit budgets so that they are sure to move people properly through the structure. In some cases, we offer a merit matrix that gives more straightforward guidance. And in others, we simply state our philosophy, which is to give larger increases to those folks who are performing well in the lower half of the range and smaller increases as you pass over that midpoint. Based on that, as soon as we have the thumbs up from you all to go ahead and implement, we would like to begin that process. Are there any questions on merit versus the classification compensation study, or on how we allocate merit?
Angie, will you scroll down to the bottom half of that memo you have on the screen?
I actually don't have control of that, John.
Right there, okay.
Which part were you focused on, Mr. Lennox?
I'm looking at the memo that I had in the committee package, and it says the merit raises were planned or budgeted at $748,000 and are included in our current 2021 budget. However, if the effective date of this becomes October 1st, that amount is reduced by 25%, or a savings of $187,000.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to indicate that was a draft, and so that was an initial thought, and so as we moved forward, then our look now is just for approval for the merit-based pay and not to proportion that out for part of the year.
Yes, I think the thinking is that this performance was for an entire fiscal year through FY20, and much of that during the early stages of the COVID pandemic. We want to reward our employees for their performance, and if the revenues are there, we would like to make that retroactive and reward them beginning September 1st. There would still be a bit of cost savings even with that date.
So instead of a quarter, it's 1/6 cost savings.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Correct. And Mr. Chairman, to kind of provide some context for why we're pursuing that, you know, the discussion by town council when the budget was adopted was to make sure that we had certainty with regards to the town revenues. At this point, based upon the information that John's been able to obtain and present to this committee, it certainly appears like we're on stable footing. So with that understanding in place, there's not really any need for us to identify cost savings to move forward. And as Angie indicated, given that this is to reflect performance for the year that's already occurred, it's hard for us to bring back to the staff that given the numbers that we're seeing right now, it would make sense not to fully compensate them for the work that had been performed.
And I understand that. Questions for Angie or Josh or John regarding this issue? David.
Yes, Angie, are our salaries comparable to, or are you feeling pressure to increase them relative to Bluffton because of traffic and location and so on, inconvenience?
Mr. Ames, thank you for the question. I think we did that with the implementation of the classification and compensation study. We addressed the market issue. Now we just are trying to move our folks through the ranges as we usually do with merit-based increases. So I don't believe that this is in response to any market conditions.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I understand the distinction, but I'm still asking the same question. On a position-to-position basis, how do we stack up against Bluffton?
I would actually have to pull out the market salary or the market survey results and look at that to give you an answer. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
That's fine. I'm interested in it from an affordable workforce housing context.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I'm comfortable moving forward as outlined by grateful we're in a position to do this.
Is that in the form of a motion, Bill?
If you'd like, I'll let that state for the record as a motion.
Is there a second? Second by Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Any further discussion? If there is none, Zendaya, would you call the roll?
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Ms. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Lennox.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Agenda item 8C. We're fortunate to have the Beaufort County Planning Director, Eric Greenway, with us to discuss recently proposed Beaufort County impact fees. Welcome, Eric.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good to be with you all. Let me try to share my screen here. I'm not a Blue Jeans user, but I will try to do this one more time. We did test earlier, so hopefully everything will go well. Can you all see that presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, a few things before we get started. First of all, you'll see on the title page there that I'm actually doing a presentation that was developed by the consultants that we hired back in 2018 to begin the study and update of our current impact fees, and that's Tish Bice. I have performed this presentation about as many times as they have, so I feel fairly comfortable with it, but I do want to give them credit for the work. First of all, I'm going to give you some background on impact fees and the state statute and what we're trying to accomplish here. And then I will move into the presentation. Our presentation will be predominantly broken down into two service areas, north of the Broad and south of the Broad. I will just briefly go over the north of the Broad numbers so that you all be familiar with that, but most of my presentation will focus on the south of the Broad service area, which I presume you would be most interested in. But if you have any questions about anything you see for north of the Broad, please feel free to stop me, and feel free to stop me at any time during this presentation with any questions or comments you may have. I do expect you all to have quite a few comments or questions as I go through this. So having said that, just a general impact fee overview. Many times folks misunderstand impact fees to be something that's recurring. It is not. It is a one-time payment for growth-related infrastructure requirements. It is only paid by new development and not existing residences or businesses, unless those existing residences or businesses build something new or expand an existing business or something like that. Impact fees fund capital improvements that add capacity. So many times people will say, okay, can we use impact fees to pave this road or improve this road? General answer to that question is only if the improvements would add some sort of capacity or improve the ability of that road to carry additional traffic, or to do an intersection improvement that makes things safer for movements that also add capacity. It's not a tax, it's an agreement to build infrastructure. It helps alleviate pressure on the general fund tax revenue for capital projects. And you have to have three requirements met in order to pass the rational nexus test. And those attorneys that are on the presentation know more about rational nexus test than I do, but I am familiar with it as a planning director. So you need, the growth creates the need for the infrastructure. You need benefit, growth receives a benefit from the infrastructure, and you need proportionality, the growth pays its fair share of the cost. Proportionality will come into play as in my presentation with regards to existing bonds that might be out there covering certain things, and also for affordable housing. That is always a big question, and we will go through an affordable housing analysis later on in the presentation. There are three common impact fee methods that we use to calculate impact fees, and one is cost recovery. That is for past oversized and unique facilities. The funds are typically used for debt service. There's an incremental expansion that's present. It's based on level of service, and it's a quantitative and qualitative measure. And then there's plan-based, which is future. Usually that's associated with utilities, but it also can be used for other public facilities. So each category of impact fees I go through, you will see the method that was used by the consultants in order to calculate. So out beside each one, it'll say incremental or plan-based. I do not think our study or update included any type of cost recovery methods for dealing with this round of updates and new fees. Generally, impact fees in South Carolina, the impact fee revenue must be maintained in an interest-bearing account. The monies must be spent within 3 years of the scheduled date for construction in the CIP. Let me elaborate on that a little bit, because that always confuses folks. It's not within 3 years of collection of the impact fee. It's within 3 years of the scheduled date for construction in the CIP. So if we have a road project out there that's listed to start construction in the year 2025, then we either have to spend that money by 2028, or we have to start refunding, which is something we would not want to be in the position of having to do. We must publish an annual monitoring report to show how the fees are being spent and what projects they're being spent on. Then you have to do a comprehensive review and update every 5 years. That requires an updated study. And then the final thing that the state of South Carolina does that's unique to the state is that they require an analysis that estimates the effect of imposing updated impact fees on affordable housing in the county. And I will go over that in the very last part of the presentation so that we can understand the impact that these impact fees will have on that particular aspect of our economy and housing stock. So these are just a lot of numbers, our population numbers. These are our 10-year residential and non-residential projections. I'll just give you a moment to absorb those a little bit. I'm not going to try to read all of those numbers to you, but it does provide the picture that we are continuing to grow. Does anyone have any questions about this particular slide or anything that I've gone over thus far? Okay. So essentially the Beaufort County Impact Fee Study, we have to enter into things called intergovernmental agreements, and we have an intergovernmental agreement with the town of Hilton Head Island. So there are some IGAs in place for some of the capital components, but we will have to revisit the IGAs with all the municipalities for the new components. You all are in the southern, south of the Broad area, so you will also be weighing in at some point on a school impact fee and discussing an IGA for that here in the near future. Speaking of school impact fees, the analysis for that, you can see that school construction, school land, school buses, all of those were based on incremental, which was the level of service issue. The service area will only be for the south of the Broad service areas, and there are no IGAs in place at this time for this fee because it is a new fee. The growth projection scenario as to why it only applies to south of the Broad, because this is the growth picture for north of the Broad. As you can see, the blue and gray line are growth lines. The red line is the capacity line for the school districts, schools in the north of the Broad. And as you can see, the enrollment in the area north of the Broad is decreasing over time as we move forward. On the other hand, south of the Broad, you'll see that enrollment will surpass capacity for the schools in south of the Broad by 2023. So you folks in south of the Broad area, service area, you're growing at a phenomenal rate. That by 2023, the enrollment in the schools will surpass the school district's ability to provide capacity to educate those students. So that particular analysis resulted in this particular chart. And as you can see, the impact fee study on the school impact fee revealed that there would be a maximum supportable fee for single family dwellings of $9,500 per unit, with a multifamily dwelling at $4,500 per unit. So I'm going to stop here and see if you all have any questions about that number.
Eric, what would happen if you pulled Hilton Head Island out of that capacity chart you just showed? Is all the growth occurring in Bluffton?
Probably not all of it, but I would suspect that there's some significant amount of growth is occurring in Bluffton and Hardyville in Beaufort County. But I would have to get that. I would have to get that analysis and that number from the consultant and provide that to you all as a follow-up response. I don't have that available right now.
Generally speaking, and I understand why you have two service areas, one north of the Broad and a second south of the Broad. Does it make any sense to consider 3 service areas, north of the Broad, south of the Broad, and Hilton Head Island?
Again, I would have to ask the consultant that question. I wouldn't know what that would do to the study. We are trying to consolidate the service areas into just 2 service areas, just for ease of administration and doing future updates to the study. But I could certainly ask the question to the consultant as to what that might do, and if they have numbers specifically on Hilton Head Island that they could segregate very easily.
Okay.
I'll be glad to do that.
One question, if I may, relative to affordable housing. Did I understand correctly that if someone were to develop an affordable housing facility, there would be an impact fee?
So, yeah, that goes back to the proportionality issue. Essentially, the impact fee statute in the state of South Carolina tries to keep everyone on a level playing field as it pertains to the infrastructure needs. Even affordable housing growth still puts a demand on infrastructure. So the state legislature allows us to do a waiver for impact fees for affordable housing, but the statute then says that impact fee has to be paid from some other source. So currently our county council has budgeted $100,000 to provide for impact fee waivers for affordable housing. And they just funded and granted a waiver, a conditional waiver, so to speak, once all the paperwork and documents are recorded, to an affordable housing project in Bluffton in the tune of $61,000. So that those impact fees will be paid out of that impact fee waiver fund that has been set up by our county council.
Mm-hmm. It just seems counterintuitive. One of our biggest issues and needs is affordable housing, and establishing a 100K fund seems like tokenism to me.
Yes, it was a minimal amount that we used just to begin starting the process. You all may or may not be aware as a group. I know Mr. Lennox has been following this and other members of Hilton have, but we're also, through the support of town of Hilton Head and other municipalities in Jasper County and Beaufort County, we all are undertaking a joint effort currently to hire a consultant to set up a regional housing trust fund. And one of the things that we're going to ask that regional housing trust fund to do is to figure out a mechanism potentially for funding impact fee waivers for affordable housing projects.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is the projected revenue over the 10-year period that you can expect to generate from the school impact fee. As you can see, the number at the very bottom there is about $89 million. Parks and Recreation is one of our existing fees that we had to do an update to the study to make sure we were in line with the state statute. Again, as you can see, all of the various types of parks that we have that we would use impact fee money for, again, are based on a level of service and the incremental approach method for calculating the fee. The service area for regional parks is county-wide. The service area for all other facilities would be north and south of the Broad. So again, that 2 service area approach to the impact fees. The only current IGA we have with a municipality is the town of Bluffton that we're aware of. So the projected facility needs for regional parks would be about $9 million over the 10-year period. I'm rounding up instead of having to read all of those numbers. The north of the Broad growth-related expenditures would be 3 million. South of the Broad would be 2 million for those particular parks. And then all of that's calculated into, after giving the credit, you'll see on some of these charts, on all of these charts where we do the maximum supportable fee credit for debt payments. So essentially, if there's an existing bond out there, you cannot charge someone, you cannot require someone to pay that bond and then pay an impact fee on top of that without deducting or giving them a credit for the existing debt that's out there. So that red number that you see for credit for debt payment is designed to equalize that particular aspect of the impact fee requirement. So again, everything on the left side of the screen is north of the Broad service area. You can see all the fees are increasing for all the various square footage of residential. And the south of the Broad, the fees are decreasing until you get down to a 3,000 square foot house. And then they start to increase what, in my opinion, would be, a minimal amount. So. And what happens is we're looking at the red box on the screen here for north of the Broad. You can see that the projected revenue and the projected expenditures leaves about a $2.5 million shortfall that would have to be funded from some other revenue source on behalf of the county. South of the Broad, that's a $3 million shortfall. And by and large, that's because I think we do not have IGAs in place for those particular aspects with all the municipalities. That if we had that, then that number, that shortfall would gap would close a little bit. Any questions about that?
As all of these impact fees are put into one bucket, what are the rules of play in terms of distribution to localities? In other words, is there some proportionate rule that comes into play that Hilton had contributed X, so it should get back X? Bluffton contributed Y, it should get back Y? Or is it go into one pool and it's controlled solely by the county council?
That is an excellent question. The answer to the question is it's not controlled by jurisdiction or proportionate to jurisdictions as to what they pay in. It's controlled by two factors. One, the service area for which the fee was collected. So if it's collected in the south of the Broad, the money has to be spent south of the Broad projects. And two, is controlled by the projects in the capital improvements plan. So if there are projects in the town of Hilton Head that are on the capital improvements plan that was included in the study, then those would be eligible projects for impact fee funding as long as we have an intergovernmental agreement with the town of Hilton Head to collect the impact fees for recreation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So libraries is our next existing study that we had to update. Again, you can see that it's based on library branches, bookmobiles, based on the level of service method. So we had two types of services, library branches, and again, that's in the two service areas of north of the Broad, south of the Broad, and then bookmobiles, because there's not that many, the service area is countywide. We have IGAs with Bluffton, Hilton Head Island, and Beaufort and Port Royal are considering entering into an IGA on the libraries. So this is the need for north of the Broad, about $3.5 million over the next 10 years. South of the Broad, $3.2 million over the next 10 years. Bookmobiles countywide would be $60,000 over the next 10 years. And then all of those numbers with the populations for each service area result in these particular fees. Again, you have north of the Broad a credit for debt payment of $33, no credit in south of the Broad. You can see that the fees decrease in north of the Broad until, again, you get down to around a 3,500 square foot house. And then you see in south of the Broad, they decrease for every category on the residential side. So this is, again, the non-impact fee funding. As you can see, we end up in north of the Broad with non-impact fee funding of $100,000, which is not terribly bad for us to make that up. South of the Broad, it's even better because you essentially end up with a zero non-impact fee funding. So that's kind of what you want to achieve with your impact fees. If you're going to use impact fees to pay for the needs for infrastructure as a result of growth, then that's where you would ideally end up overall. So that tells us that we're right on track with the library impact fee amount that we have set. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Our next fee, I'm just going to go through quickly. This is a new fee for us. It's not a fee that you all will have to consider because I think you provide your own EMS services. So I'll just go through these slides very quickly. Again, level of service is the approach, incremental. It's countywide, excluding Hilton Head Island. There are no IGAs in place because this is, again, a new fee, just like with the school. So we'll have to have those discussions with everyone. The need is $4 million over the next 10 years. That was for EMS stations. The need for EMS vehicles is 1.5 over the next 10 years, countywide. And all of that with the credit for existing debt, it will yield the fees that you see in green for residential at the top. And this is where we're moving into non-residential fees as well. So you can see the fees for retail based on the amount per 1,000 square feet based on the different retail type. I mean, the commercial types or non-residential types, or retail, office and service, industrial or institutional. Institutional, of course, would be hospitals, nursing homes, those types of facilities. And then, of course, you do the calculation. We come up with a non-impact fee funding of 1.4 million that we would have to find the money through some other revenue source. Next fee is fire. Again, you all do not have to worry about this, so I'll quickly go through this again as well. You can see they're all incremental. We have north of the Broad service area, excluding Beaufort and Port Royal, and then the Bluffton Township Fire District, which is encompasses south of the Broad area outside of Hilton Head and the town of Bluffton. So again, these are the numbers. 7 million is the need in north of the Broad. 11 million is the need south of the Broad. This is the fee for north of the Broad. You can see a decrease until you get to around 2,000 square foot house, and then it starts increasing from that point onward. There's a $323 credit for existing debt. Bluffton Fire District, a $142 credit. You can see there's an increase in all the housing square footages here, with the exception of 1,000 square feet or less, but I doubt there's many 1,000 square foot or less homes being built south of the Broad unless it's an apartment complex. And then this is basically what we use to calculate the fee. EDU stands for equivalent dwelling unit, so it depends on the type of hazard that you're constructing. If it's low hazard, then of course, you know, the fee is lower. As you go up to a high hazard, the fee kind of increases on the calculation that you use. One of the unique things that we did with the impact fee, I'll go over in just a moment, but before I do that, you can see for north of the Broad, we're about $900,000 that we'd have to find from other revenue sources. South of the Broad, we're about $1 million short, where we would have to find other revenue sources. This is a unique thing that I thought our fire chiefs did really well with. They are willing to exempt someone from an impact fee or waive the impact fee if the residential dwelling has an approved sprinkler system within it. I mean, that was a big thing a few years ago in the state of South Carolina was in-home sprinkler systems. So our fire chiefs have said if someone does that, relieves, it gives them enough relief where they're comfortable with the waiving the impact fee on that. However, on the other hand, if someone is going to build more than a 5,000 square foot house, they are going to require that person to pay the equivalent of 2 dwelling units due to the advanced equipment and vehicles that are necessary to fight those fires. So, kind of unique situation there. Transportation, again, this is another big issue. I would imagine that you all are most interested in transportation in schools, library somewhat, parks and rec a little bit, but the transportation improvements was plan-based. Again, the service areas are north and south of the Broad. Current IGAs, all municipalities are participating in the transportation impact fee. So basically the north of the Broad, again, plan-based approach, everything else is incremental, but the transportation is the plan-based. We actually list the projects. You can see some of the projects that are listed here north of the Broad. County anticipates contributing 85% of the cost for the for these projects, with 15% coming from other sources, state or federal funding. I will not read all of those projects. If you all have a question about any of them, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have, but I do not know that you all would be terribly interested in transportation projects north of the Broad. South of the Broad, I will give you a moment to absorb that particular road list. I know that you all have sent a letter with some comments on various projects, and we are currently working through that and setting up. We'll be in touch with city management here in the next few days to set up meetings so that we can begin to discuss intergovernmental agreements and the project list. Josh and Steve need to be on the lookout for that particular email from my office. So, any questions about the project list here or comments about that? If you see something that's not listed in this list, now would be the time when we do those meetings. And this is maybe more for the administration side of the equation. Now is the time for us to have those discussions, because if we did not put a project in that should be included, then we have to go back and recalculate to make sure the fees are correct to cover that additional money. So any questions about this? All right. So north of the Broad, you can see across the board for every category, residential and non-residential, the fee is decreasing. And in some cases, it's pretty substantial decrease. South of the Broad is decreasing in a couple of spots for 1,000 square feet or less, and then 1,500 to 1,750 square feet of houses. And then it's decreasing for retail, office and service areas, and institutional as well. So north of the Broad, the revenue and non-impact fee funding, again, we hit zero. So we're pretty confident that that we're in good shape there. The south of the Broad, about $900,000 that we would have to find from some other funding source to cover the cost of the projects in the listed in the CIP versus the impact fee collection. And then finally, this is the way it looks across the board. That includes all the fees. Parks and Recreation, Library, Transportation, and Fire are the existing fees that we're updating. EMS is a new fee for the county. So that's what it looks like for north of the Broad. As you can see, a slight decrease for the smallest category of housing square footage, and then a total decrease for non-residential for all the different types of uses listed. And then south of the Broad, this is the picture as well. And the only decrease on non-residential, of course, is for institutional. And then you have a decrease for up to 1,250 square feet of housing, and then the 1,750 category. And then after that, everything, all other categories are increases. Any questions about this chart? Housing affordability. So what does this do to the housing affordability? North of the Broad, it has a 0.1 increase in housing cost burden for home ownership. You can see the chart there of what it would basically do there. And then south of the Broad, again, is a 0.1% increase in the housing cost burden ratio if these fees are to be adopted and collected. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions or additional comments for me.
Thank you, Eric. What questions do you have, committee, of Eric on impact fee presentation?
Eric, what are the developers telling you about this, or have you presented?
The Home Builders Association and Realtor Association, and those are, they are basically saying that the information about school impact fees is, they're calling some of that methodology into question. Mm-hmm. So, the municipalities that I've talked to, again, I've presented to you all south of the Broad. So I don't really know all the other municipalities north of the Broad, and they're not having to worry about the school impact fee. Mm-hmm. The school impact fee is the big component for everyone south of the Broad, as you might imagine, and what that would do to housing affordability and growth south of the Broad. I will tell you, in my past career and past jurisdictions I worked for, I was in York County when we originally did the school impact fee there. We went through the same thing with the home builders and the Realtors Association, saying that it would basically curtail growth in the one school district that adopted it in York County. But if anything, it accelerated growth in that particular school district, having the impact fee there, because the school system got that much better, that much faster, because having the impact fee allows them a revenue source for adding capacity to the school district, which would free up additional monies for operations and things. You cannot use impact fee money for operations, but if you've got that money coming in, then as a school board, you're not trying to allocate money for paying for growth and operations at the same time. So my direct experience with impact fees when it relates to a school is that it does not impact growth in a negative way. But again, it's all about balance. That'll be one of the things that you hear me talk about as a planner to everyone, is that planning and economic development and affordability and development regulations and all of that are about achieving the right balance to create the best quality of life for all the citizens that live or come to our jurisdiction. So we have to make sure that we have that addressed appropriately.
Well, I think you answered my final question. Is the impetus behind all of this to control growth, to slow growth, or to manage growth?
It's to manage growth. It's to make sure that the growth that's coming in, that is being the burden of that paying for the infrastructures associated with that growth is shared in proportion between the folks coming in from out of the area into our beautiful county, and not overburden the existing residents that have already lived here,
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It's to help achieve that balance between, new folks coming in versus the existing resident. Because growth is going to have to be paid for one way or the other. It either comes from, property tax sources or, other revenues that we may be able to generate, or you can use impact fees to help assist with that so that the burden on existing residents and taxpayers is somewhat mitigated proportionally.
Mm.
Eric, what is your timing on this? When do you expect County Council to move on this?
County Council has given first reading to the school impact fee by title only. They did that several weeks ago. We are now standing pat on further adoption of that until we can have discussions with the municipalities on entering into the intergovernmental agreements for that. We will not, as I understand it, we will not take any action on the remaining impact fees, EMS, Parks, Rec, libraries, all of that, until we have the intergovernmental agreement discussion with the municipalities. So it's critical that I get those meetings scheduled with city managers and administration very, very soon. And we'll be working on that for the remainder of this week. So you all should hear from us this week about having a meeting.
And what are you expecting from the town in terms of an IGA?
We will be forwarding the templates of the IGA with that. Your town manager, Jennifer Ray and Sean, and your planning staff there, that your very talented planning staff, I will tell you, have already provided a comment letter about the impact fee projects that have been listed, and I made some comments on that. So that'll be one of the things that we'll take up and discuss with them in a meeting, as well as the IGA. So they are on top of it for you all, and we will continue to work with them and coordinate with them. And I know your city management team will continue to coordinate and communicate with you all as necessary as we go through that process.
And to the committee, the comment letter that Eric was referring to is in our package.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn.
Morning, Eric. It's Glenn Stanford.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for trying to present and simplify an extraordinarily complex matter. Being someone that likes to see things simplified, I'm wondering if in this elaborate report that you have sent to us, if there is a summary that shows what the increases and decreases are by comparison north of the Broad and south of the Broad.
Yes, there is. I can provide that to your planning staff, and they can get that out to you. Yeah, there's a textual summary and graph summary as well that would make it easy for you all
Sure.
to.
I just like to see it summarized so that we can see what the overall impact is. Thank you again for a great report.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I do have one, Tom.
David.
Eric, it's David Ames. Is this information available to be reviewed on the county website?
It is not, but we have provided the impact fee, the full impact fee study, and the full PowerPoint presentations to your planning staff, so they could get that to you. And if they do not have it, I'll be glad to provide it to them again. so that they can send that out to you all. But the full impact fee study is available. I would encourage you all to read that, particularly if you have trouble sleeping at night. Just crack that thing open right before you go to bed, and you won't have any trouble drifting off. I can assure you that.
David, it's part of our F&A package.
I'm just thinking for the public's benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do have it available online as well. So,
Eric,
Thank
where can we find the annual monitoring report?
that would be through our finance department link on our website. They do it, and Josh might be able to elaborate on that. The finance department handles that monitoring report as a part of the annual budget.
Thank you. Good job, Eric.
Thank you, sir.
I agree with Glenn. It is a really complex issue to deal with.
Yeah, it is complex. I appreciate the opportunity to address you all. Look forward to working with your very talented staff members. It's always good to see Council Member Stanford. We worked closely together on the St. James Church relocation, and so we'll be continuing to work together as we go through this process. I look forward to that opportunity again. So thank you all very much. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me or give me a call. And I want to say one additional thing, if I can, and I'll move on, is I appreciate also the assistance of your staffer, Jennifer Ray, there with the Regional Housing Trust Fund. She made me look very good through that entire process. So kudos to her for her hard work on helping me put that together. So thank you all very much.
Well said. Thank you, Eric. Zendaya, agenda item 8D, a discussion of a revised standard POA PUD drainage agreement to be led by, I believe, Jeff Neitziger. Yes, I see Jeff on the screen. Welcome, Jeff. You're muted.
Jeff, it's going to be at the top of the screen next to the camera. The microphone next to the camera.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you see my screen or not? The presentation?
No.
You'll have to hit share screen, which is next to the microphone button.
Okay, I see it's showing up over to the side where I can't. All right, one more time. Something about those two screens is not working for me here.
Try dragging it to the opposite screen. But you also have to share your screen as well.
Yeah, it's not working. It's showing a dialog box is flashing up to the side. It's not letting me share it. Oh. I'm not sure what to do here.
Jeff?
Yes.
Zendaya is on her way down to help you out.
Okay, thank you.
While that happens, why don't we move to agenda item 8E, a review and approval of proposed 2021 meeting dates.
Yep.
Have you all had a chance to review the schedule, and are there any concerns or recommendations for changes?
Nope. Okay, I'm okay.
Fine.
If there are none, is there a motion to approve the schedule as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All
Second.
those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Okay. The schedule is approved.
Okay, wait. Can I just?
Hey, Jeff, are you able to email the presentation to me and I can try to share it on our end here?
Send it to Teresa and Renee, please. Zendaya?
Jeff or Cynthia, are you able to hear us? This is Teresa. Would you be able to email the presentation over to us?
Yes, I'm emailing it now.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and start with the presentation. They're going to bring it up in just a minute. I've emailed the presentation, so it can be shared. So, as you're all aware, since 2018, we've been working through making revisions. Oh, there it is. Beautiful. So, who's advancing? Could I advance to this slide, to the second slide? Okay, this works. Sorry about that technical difficulty. So, I'm just showing here a list of the current agreement partners. Keep that in mind right now. There's 11 agreement partners that have come on board with agreements, drainage agreements with the town since 2007. Next slide, please. And in 2018, the committee tasked us at the staff level with looking at these agreements and seeing if there were inconsistencies between them. And sure enough, over time, there were there was various parts of the language that that was a little bit inconsistent, and certainly there was a need for greater clarity that we'd learned and having operated with these agreements now for 10 to 12 years. Next slide, please. Again, this kind of is speaking to what I just said in the last slide. So there's a lot of things where maybe the agreement could have been a lot more clear and concise, especially when it comes to terms of definition of what the drainage system that we maintain is, definition of qualifying deficiencies is a big one, and then to better nail down and clarify the responsibilities of the town in the agreement and the responsibilities of the association. Next slide, please. Just bear in mind, as we're looking at this today, we've been working on this now at staff level for about 2 years, trying to get this thing good to go and reviewed by all. In that time and previous to that time, we've had folks that are waiting that would like agreements as well. That's a list of the 6 that are currently in line right now. Some of them have been waiting several years, and we'd really like to get them on board with new agreements as soon as possible. Next slide, please. This is a timeline. I know we've been in this committee meeting for a long time, but this just kind of gives you the details about how we met with the committee December of 2018, and y'all gave us the nod to go ahead and distribute it to the PUD partners. This was the first version of the boilerplate that we had edited internally as staff, and we sent that out to the PUDs right before Christmas of 2018. Met with all of them here at council chambers and town hall in January of 2019. And over the next few months, we received a lot of feedback, either in person or via email. And we took those comments and created a new version of the agreement. Again, that initial send out had been to the current agreement holders. So we sent the revised document out to several that had been waiting so they could take a look at what they were going to be about to sign. And that started another feedback loop where we received legal reviews from 2 or more of the prospective agreement partners. So by this point, by the fall of 2018, we had had a lot of feedback, a lot of legal reviews, and we incorporated all those. And then we worked with the town attorney over the winter and spring of 2020 to get the whole thing looked at from a legal perspective, and we're very comfortable that this is a finalized version and take into account all comments. COVID hit, so that kind of slowed us down a little bit. We intended to get this going a little bit earlier in the year, but here we are. I sent the whole document out earlier this month to all the current and prospective partners. I met with many of them in person, the GMs of many of the existing partners, and there were a couple tweaks I made late in the month. I sent that those revisions back out in advance of this meeting, reflecting the attachments, the new boilerplate version of the agreement, Exhibit A, and the Exhibit B, which is kind of a summary document that kind of highlights the significant changes. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights, again, I think I spoke on an earlier slide to some of the things people have concerns with. So we have a much more succinct and expanded definition of what the drainage system includes, and then some more specific guidance on things that are not included per the drainage agreement. Next slide, please. And again, we spent a lot of time describing what a qualifying deficiency is, something that we would be able to fix. And a lot of times the best ways to define that is to list things that specifically do not qualify. So between those 2 lists, we have a very succinct definition of the sorts of deficiencies that we would address via the agreement. Next slide, please. Again, some more specifics about what the town would be responsible for, more succinctly, and what the association would be responsible for. There was a little bit of lack of clarity. This is a maintenance agreement. So by and large, the town does not participate in operation of the system within the gates. When we talk about operation of a system that's largely passive, it comes down to the gates and weirs and occasionally a pump that is owned by the PUD that might need to be operated to manipulate water levels. So that's still the responsibility of the association. Maintenance of weir boards and again, access to the system is a big theme of this version of the agreement, a lot more specific, requiring the PUDs to provide and maintain access to the drainage system components, whether it's a ditch or we need access along a work shelf, or whether it's overgrowth that prevents us from getting to a control structure or a dilapidated decking or access way. One of the other significant things here that we've included is something that's kind of specific, and that's basically if we go in and find a deficient pipe that's running through underneath a lot of roadway and pathway and other infrastructure, and we determine that it's able to be lined. In other words, a trenchless technology where we don't have to dig the whole road up and all the stuff on the surface. We install the pipe, but then do not want to take responsibility for the maintenance agreement for repairing or reconstructing in the surface that may have been rippled or damaged or cracked because of the failure of the pipe underneath. Next slide, please. Again, I think this is speaking again to the access. This speaking more to the legal aspects of it. There's a component of the system within a PUD that falls on private property. We leave it up to the PUD to provide us that right of entry, provide us that access. And if there's a situation where reasonable access is going to require unavoidable damage, something that's a pipe between two buildings and behind two fences, underneath a propane tank. If there's things that we need to get out of the way that we cannot fix the system without addressing, we will give you a kind of a list of here's what we would need to do that we would leave to the PUD to do for us or repair after we're done if it's absolutely unavoidable to get the structure to repair it. So this doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen sometimes. Or ornamental trees, flower beds, fences, things like that. Next slide, please. A few other things that are minor compared to the other ones, but some change in notification time wherever possible to give us a little more time to be able to be on site if the association is making an emergency repair. If we want to be able to look at what's going on and make sure it's being installed right, if the repair is being made not by us, but the intent is for reimbursement. A little more robustness to the documentation requirements for what's required to be reimbursed if the PUD or POA determines to do the work on their own and request reimbursement. And again, I think we just talked about the access on private properties. Next slide, please. So what we've done is, like I said, we've had a number of reviews by PUDs and taken comments, legal reviews, incorporated all of those, and so it's been looked at by hundreds of eyes for more than almost 2 years now. I think that we've got this thing to where we've got a standard agreement with standard terms and conditions that we would like to request the committee and town council to consider moving forward with allowing us to use this standard agreement, offer it to the PUDs as a standard agreement with non-negotiable terms. We'd like to do that with the folks that have had their hands up for years now, waiting, the 6 that are in line for new agreements. Go ahead with that post haste. And then to give the existing agreement holders a few months to consider and determine whether or not they'd also like to accept the terms of the new non-negotiable agreement and sign up for that, or decline the offer. Next slide, please. So just to boil this down into what we would recommend the timeline for this would be, that would mean if given the go-ahead, we'd go ahead and get the paperwork started to get the new agreement partners signed up, with the goal being by December 31st of this year. Per the terms of these agreements, they would be eligible to submit deficiencies for us to evaluate and consider in the fiscal 22 budget. And with the existing agreement partners, give them a little more time. A lot of these are larger entities that would have some internal review time that would be necessary. And as long as we get that stuff done and we're just updating the agreement, we could give until right before the termination date per the contract terms in all these existing agreements of 120 days to terminate. Gives either entity the right to terminate within 120 days on an annual basis. So I think that was a little rushed, but I think that's the end of what I have right now.
Thank you, Eric. Are you prepared to take any questions or comments at this time?
Sure.
Okay. Committee and Glenn and David. Bill.
Yes. First, congratulations, Jeff, on this report. I recall sitting in the room, in our conference room, when you gathered all of the POA leaders together, and as I recall, it wasn't the happiest meeting about trying to pull this together, but you've done that, and I think you've done it quite well. Just a couple of things here. If you turn to page 6, item I, if you go down, I think about 5 lines, valves, gates, debris, that does, is this a typo? Should you have that does not?
Are you in the summary document?
I'm in the full document itself on page 6 of 32, item I. Page 6 of 32, item
Yeah.
I.
I'm there.
Halfway down, beginning with valves, gates, debris, that does not have an appreciable.
That's correct.
Okay. Then if you go to page 6, double I, where you introduce the word pollution, that means many things to many people. I would just respectfully suggest you might want to create a little bit of a definition. And then on page 4, where you have, you introduce BMPF is a facility designed and built to, I think it would make it stronger if in fact there are basic specs for a BMPF facility. It would just make it tighter. Because you're introducing a concept without specs, and that's that's something to consider. And then my last comment is that I think this is a very well done document, and it's when you read it, it's fairly authoritative, which I think it needs to be. But if you insert the word reasonable throughout this document, I think it would be helpful. For example, on page 4J, where it states anything that in the determination of the town, I mean, the town will act reasonably. I don't think it hurts to put that in, or you may create that as a preamble to the document, that the something to the effect that as the town exercises its say, authority and responsibility relative to this document, it will be guided by reasonable determination. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you for those.
And you may want to talk to our counsel about those too.
So I believe Curtis is on the call. If he'd like to chime in, that'd be good. He has reviewed the document, not these last little minor changes, but by and large, he was involved.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Curtis.
And I'm not looking for a quick answer here, but those are thoughts I think you ought to consider.
I mean, if you're asking me, that's fine. I'll get with Jeff after the meeting. We'll look at it, and if there's a chance to revise the text, it won't be major revisions, but we'll certainly look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn.
Thank you, Jeff. Great work on this. I have to tell you that I am concerned about a, quote, non-negotiable, unquote, agreement being imposed on, I think you said 12 different parties. And it occurs to me that the conditions and situations in each one of these PUDs is considerably different from the others. And now, if they have said that they're willing to go with this agreement, that's fine. But it just, as a matter of policy, to me, seems pretty heavy-handed to come in and say non-negotiable, given the different conditions that exist in various PUDs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. The intent of the non-negotiable is speaking specifically to the terms or the level of service and the extent of service that we will provide. We want that to be consistent so that nobody's getting a different deal than their neighbor. We're providing this service, to private communities, which is, atypical of spending public funds to begin with. So we want to be very careful that providing the service in here is a fair game for everybody, and that's the point of the standardization.
I understand that, and that makes perfect sense to me. But the other question is, have the parties to the existing agreements found this non-negotiable agreement to be acceptable?
That's what we've been trying to get to put this out and receive comments. Now, I haven't heard any feedback in the two recent email blasts with the most recent versions of this to where I've heard anything that caused anybody significant consternation. The meetings that I've had have had some issues with minor parts of the language, but certainly not, by and large, misunderstanding the intent of where we're going with this. This was discussed, even 2 years ago at the meetings that we had.
I understand, and that there's a big change between what was going on now versus 2 years ago. But I don't think you should just assume that that's acceptable. I think that they need to be pinned down so that we're sure that everyone feels like they're being treated fairly. That being said, I certainly agree that the services being provided by the town within the various PUDs should be the same. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just concerned about the imposition of this contract as non-negotiable. That's acceptable if it's already been negotiated. So I would suggest that you follow up with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeff, I assume that the existing contracts have a sunset.
The term renews automatically if neither party wants to end it. So that's that 120-day prior to the beginning of a fiscal year window that either party can choose not to. Otherwise, it's got an annual automatic renewal trigger. There's no specific sunset date that I'm aware of.
And it's your intent to use the 120 days.
That's the mechanism by which we would transfer to this new standard agreement. Yes.
Okay. Does the new standard agreement have any impact on your existing priority list?
No, matter of fact, I guess let me just say a few more things about the way this whole agreement works. In my 3.5 years here, and in what I've heard in the time before I was here in working with our agreement partners, we really haven't had any major issues. I mean, there hasn't been anything we haven't been able to work out on the ground, in the field, wherever, as far as getting on the same page with, does this qualify? Who's going to pay for what? Who's going to provide what? I mean, it's been very smooth. We don't have big issues here, but the concern is at some point, players might change, things might change, relationships might change. So we want to make sure that we used all this experience with the agreements to set in stone how we operate day to day. So this is all something that I think on both sides, all the PUD maintenance managers that work with this and all the GMs that are familiar with how we do it and provide the service inside we're very comfortable with what we've done here is just try to codify how we work business as usual with these agreements providing the service.
Okay.
So nothing would change as far as prioritization of projects. That's the same process every year.
Okay. Tammy, do you have a comment?
Pardon?
I do have a question, but I'm not sure it's necessarily as appropriate as I had once thought to ask it at this time.
Okay.
But I will follow up with Scott in the office there and ask my question directly and see where it leads me. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Any other before we wrap up and entertain a motion? If there are no other questions, then Jeff, you're looking for us to move this up to town council for further consideration and approval.
Yes, sir. I think bearing in mind that Councilman Harkins already had some specific suggestions that we might want an opportunity to, like Curtis suggested, talk about those and make those revisions. But when we get to it, we'd like to, put a stop to changes so that we do, in fact, have a standardized agreement.
Well, is there a motion to move this forward subject to Curtis and Jeff reviewing the suggestions that Bill Harkins made?
I'm comfortable with that. Again, in summary, there's only one typo. That's and then there's the point of definition, and then there's the point of creating a sense of reasonable discretion. So with that understood, I have full confidence in Curtis being able to weave that through there. So I would support moving forward after it passes over Curtis's desk one more time.
Okay, it has been properly moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any further discussion? If there is none, Zendaya, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Agenda item 9. We have a need for executive session to discuss the proposed contractual negotiations relative to the designated marketing organization services pursuant to section 6-4-10 of the South Carolina Code of Laws. Is there a motion to go into executive session? Mr. Harkins.
Yes, I move we do that. And if, Mr. Chairman, if we could have a 3-minute break.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Zendaya, will you call the roll?
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes, and
Thank
we'll
you, Mr.
meet
Chairman.
in 3 minutes.
Okay, now, Mr. Lennox.
We have concluded our executive session. The result recommended in the public session. Is there any additional business to come before this committee? If there
Move
is,
for adjournment.
moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Thank you, committee. We stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.